Hi, I'm Gavin,
And I'm Oscar.
and welcome back to the Sound Project. So today we've got a case study of a church project that we did years ago called Resurrection Lutheran here in the Indianapolis area. And I thought this would be a fun one to go over just because we're involved from the ground up on this job. Like sometimes we're brought in and we're, Acoustics is sometimes an afterthought that we need to fix at a later date. But in this case, like the architect brought us in from the very beginning. And I do want to mention some of the partners on this project, Ratio Architects, which we've worked a lot with over the past. They brought us in as a subcontractor for this job. And then Susan Fleck Photography, some of the photos that you see are from her photography company. And this shape of the room was kind of defined by the time we got involved. Like it was a bit of a kind of baseball diamond shape, angled out sidewalls. The stage there is in the kind of bottom right-hand corner of this image. And then the entrance doors were opposite to that. Now, the one thing that we really were able to speak into, since this was from the ground up build, is that the shaded areas on this diagram, originally, they were flat, so just parallel to the floor, and they were drop tile ceiling tiles there. Mm-hmm. And one of the things in getting to know the church more and how they use the space, one of the biggest things was that they wanted the room to feel enveloping and full for musical applications. They had a lot of stringed instruments and brass instruments, and they're like, we really want this place to feel really full. Sometimes when we're working with churches, they want it to be pretty dead and dry. They said, like, we want speech to be heard and understood, but that's the bare minimum on that part. We don't want it to be so dry and oppressive in there because we want the music to be able to sing. Right. And so with those wings being flat and drop tile ceiling, which adds a lot of absorption, especially in the high end, as you know, that's where they set up their musical instruments. So it's like in the bottom left or the top right of this drawing is where they would set up. And if that was the case, that sound would hit off of that flat ceiling that's absorptive and then not carry out throughout the rest of the room. So we were able to speak into that. We did a little early rudimentary ray tracing. This is more of a manual version. Now there's some automated programs that we do, but I did this in AutoCAD to kind of show them the difference between a flat slope and a 10-degree slope or a 7.13 degree slope, which is what they ended up going with. But with the flat one, you can see there the source being on the left-hand side. This is the middle one there that says no slope, 16-foot ceiling. Any sound that hits that, just kind of angle of incidence equal to angle reflection, just comes right back down. And you can see that those pink rays don't actually travel to the other side of the room very well. The 7.3 degree slope, I actually think they went with the 10 degree slope in this case. 7.3 was maybe the first iteration of what the architect drew up. But you see, like, it gets more energy over to the other wing of the church, but not as much as the 10-degree slope does. You get a lot of that reflected energy getting pushed over there. So not only did we change the slope, but then we changed it to drywall instead of drop tile so that it was able to reflect that sound over there. Because with the drop tile, it just reduced the reverb time too much, right. how that can happen.
Yeah, and that's such a, every church is so different and every church is a worship style, mm-hmm. Especially where I feel like in the past there was a time where it was all live instrumentation and churches were very lively, a very lively environment. But now there are a lot of more modern churches where their production systems is a lot of times closer to a live performance venue as opposed to a church. And so, but there are a lot of churches that have different types of worship styles. Yeah. And so obviously they call for a lot of different types of acoustical environments.
Yeah, it's big just to know who your client is and what they want, because it's like you're not designing for what you care about. You want to know how they're going to be using the space. So it was really important to have those meetings with the architect and the client and just say, hey, what in an ideal world, you're building this thing from scratch. Like what would you like it to sound like? So that helped a lot. One of the other things that we caught early on in the design process is that the back wall originally had kind of a concave surface where those entrance doors were. And those entrance doors were mostly glass. So it wasn't something that we could treat with acoustical panels. And so we ended up in the design, instead of having a concave surface, we just flattened it out so that the focusing, you can kind of see on this, is that sound generated from the stage would get focused right back to the stage because the center of the radius of curvature of that back wall just focused in on that stage area. So we were able to avoid that just by making a little minor change to the doors.
And so did you end up flattening out those doors?
Yeah. Yep. Cool. So the next thing here, we went in after construction was complete because we had done some models of the room and come up with a acoustical treatment plan, but we wanted to test the real world conditions. So we went in, since the room is very symmetrical, we ended up testing 7 spots on the right hand side of the room here, and those are all color coded. So in our report, we can show like frequency response and impulse data for that. And one of the metrics that we use a lot in large rooms is the RT60, the reverb time, the time it takes for sound to decay by 60 decibels. And in the untreated room with no people present, it was right around 1.7 seconds at mid frequencies. And once you add people in there, that might get it down to 1.4 or something like that. So it's definitely a little bit more on the lively side of things compared to what you would do for speech. But that actually helped us when talking to them. It's like, hey, this data, this is where it's at right now. And they're like, we really don't want it to be too much more dead than it is right now. So we had to change our treatment plan a little bit.
Yeah.
This is a graph of the reverb time showing the kind of dark blue line there is the modeled untreated without an audience. So that's what we predicted the room was going to be like. And then the orange line was the measured untreated without an audience. So what you want to see in these graphs is these lines tracing each other pretty well, and they do. There's a little bit of variance there, but that could just be the difference between seating absorption or different materials that were used in the construction. The green line was if we modeled it untreated but with an audience, so their average attendance. And so you can see that drops it pretty significantly down to about 1.4 seconds. And then the other two options are just showing full treatment with the audience or just the rear wall and upper wall panels, which is actually what we ended up doing in this case. Mm-hmm. So another thing that we do is a subjective listening test, and we got people from the congregation to sit in spots where I put the microphones and just read a list of standardized words, and they circle what they think they heard. And so you see here, most of the tests are above 90% correct, but there are a few, like one was 76%, one was 86%, 84%. We love to see those numbers to be above 90% in most cases. And then on the far right-hand side, you see the STI, which is a 0 to 1 rating. 1 would be perfectly intelligible, 0 would be unintelligible. And so it's kind of right in the mid-range there. It's like between 0.43 and 0.59. And so not great, but it is also an untreated room. So it's kind of to be expected.
Yeah. What kind of STI measurement ratings are we typically looking for?
Yeah, it's great to get them definitely above I'd like to see them above 0.7 if we can. You never are going to get, perfect 1, but if we can get them up to 0.7, even 0.8 or 0.9, that would be ideal.
Cool.
Yeah. We also measured noise criteria in the room, and this is just a measure of how loud the room is with just HVAC systems and things like that running. And this ranged from 26 up to 31, which is right in the range of what a church should be. When we're doing studios, we like to have that number between 15 to 20 if we can. But for a church environment, this is right within range. So.
Yeah, and for a much larger space with the level of HVAC and equipment that they have in there, I think that's pretty typical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was fine, which was nice to measure it because then we knew that all the mechanical systems were installed properly and didn't have to make any adjustments on that front.
Yeah.
This looks like there's a lot of information going on here. This is every location that we showed there previously, the frequency response overlaid. And we look at patterns with this to where we try to look at, okay, what does the front of house look like versus on audience location, because sometimes there's discrepancies there, and it's important to know, okay, if front of house engineer has a dip at this frequency and it's a peak everywhere else, they shouldn't be boosting that frequency because it's just how that particular location hears. But it's nice to be able to see this. You notice how one of those locations, it dies off a significant amount in the high end, and that was because that location wasn't covered by the speaker system very well. And so it wasn't a room issue, it was more of a speaker coverage issue, but we were able to point that out and have them make some adjustments.
Yeah, and frequency response graphs are really helpful for assessing both the room and the the sound system in the space, where reverb time will be pretty consistent regardless of what sound system you have in the room, where the reverb time is a room metric. And so something that's really great about the frequency response is that it allows us to get some context for speech transmission index and speech intelligibility measurements, but kind of assessing, is this coming from is this a speaker issue or a sound system issue, or is this more of the room issue? And so we're able to compare the frequency response with the reverb time and, kind of use these different metrics. And obviously each project's a little different. And so it's not, there's not only one answer for, if you have a dip or a lack of energy in this area, then that's definitely a sound system issue.
Sure.
But comparing and contrasting the two kind of helps us pinpoint where the room needs to be improved and where the sound system might need some tweaking.
It's a great point. I mean, it's always it's sometimes a luxury of us being able to go and do this testing before the treatment gets finalized, because all of this data just helps inform us more. Like, we can create models of the room and predict things. However, the real world is a different animal. So it's good to look at things like that. We also look at impulse responses. So this is an impulse response of a location that was kind of towards the front of the room, and you see a lot of this direct energy that is hitting in the first 20 milliseconds or so. But then there's a big spike that's happening around like 100 milliseconds later, and that would be perceived as a totally separate sound source, and it happened to be reflections off the back wall coming back to that listening position. And so ideally what we were trying to do is absorb some of that rear wall energy, so there's less reflections that come back, less distracting sounds for the audience members. Yeah. So some construction shots. These are some progress photos that we got from the architect along the way, just showing some of the framed out. You see it's a vaulted ceiling there in the center section, and then it kind of goes down to those wings that ended up getting that slope and the drywall surface. There's a little bit of a showing that slope, but then also some of the vaulted area right below the windows are areas that we treated as well, and I'll show you some photos of that in a little bit. Again, more of those angled ceilings. Now, building an angled ceiling like this, it absolutely is more expensive to do something like this, and that's why we're always in constant communication with the client, making sure that we know that this is what they want. Because if they didn't care about the music feeling like enveloping and full and all of that, there would be no reason to do something like this and go to that extra expense. But ultimately, it gave them what they needed. Yeah. There's some of the side windows. In our original plan, we actually had some treatment in between these windows, but after doing testing, we determined that, hey, that could be a phase 2 or phase 3 if the first phase is not enough. And it turned out phase 1 was all that they needed, and it saved them on acoustical treatment. Yeah,
and that's somewhere where when a client, that wants a livelier environment, they have the splaying of the walls where they're not having a lot of parallel wall space in this room. And so if, reverb time doesn't need to be too low, you might not need as much treatment, but reflection buildups and harsh reflections will still be an issue even if you have a higher reverb time. And so angling walls a bit, by at least 10 degrees can be a really good way of mitigating those issues.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great way to do that and keep the reverb time intact. Yeah. So it's great. Again, more photos there. This is the back of the room. There's a very large window up there. Luckily, we were able to work with the AV integrator to angle the speakers so that they're not firing much energy at all onto that glass surface, but it makes the room it fills it with a beautiful amount of natural light and makes the space feel very open. And then this is a final shot of the room. What's nice about this space is that you can't really tell, you can see some panels when you're looking for them, but when you walk into the room, it's not something where you just see a blanketed acoustical panels everywhere. The main ones that you see is kind of around those glass doors in the back there. There's some white panels to match the walls. And then there's some up there in the clear story area by the speakers in that area right below the windows to catch some of that early reflections that come off of those line arrays that are hung up there. This is the front view of the room. Again, you kind of see the panels up high. Other than that, there was some stone on the front wall, which offers a little bit of diffusion. But again, we're trying to create a space that is more lively for their music applications. There's a kind of close-up of some the speakers plus the panels that are located up there. And this shows more of those back wall panels. We absolutely, in our design, had way more treatment in this when we first started the project. But as we talked with them more, learned more about what they're trying to do, that's when we determined, like, hey, we actually should take away some of this treatment to make it happen the way they'd like it to.
Yeah, and it's a cool example of, like, not every room is the same. Where, like, a lot of times this might be the type of room that you go into and your first thought might be they could probably use more treatment than this.
Yeah.
But again, if that's not what their goals are, if that's not what they're actually needing, an acoustical consultant still helps kind of mitigate the issues that might arise from not having a lot of treatment in the room, or as much as you might typically have.
Yeah.
So things like taming that slapback echo, or angling the ceilings to get that enveloping sound in the room is still possible without having as much treatment as a client might, having a ton of treatment the way a client might not want to have.
Yeah. So it's just, we always make it a point to listen to our clients and find out what they need. Because again, it's not about our space or our some signature sound that we have. It's more so of what we want to make their dreams happen. So it's nice to be involved in that process. I actually got to go to the grand opening of this church when I got to go to a Sunday service there, and it was just really nice to see something that we'd worked on for a year come to fruition and be able to experience it firsthand.
Yeah, and it's so cool that it's another local project. We always love getting to work in our Indiana community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's been another episode of the S.O.U.N.D Project. Really appreciate you being a part of it. And I'm curious, from your tastes, do you like a more lively or a more controlled environment like this when you're performing music? If you could comment that below, that'd be great, and we'll see you next week.